Gracias.
Bueno, y mientras tanto vamos a nuestro siguiente invitado para ver un panorama un poquito más internacional de lo que ha ocurrido en el día de hoy. Tenemos con nosotros a Sebastian Vismara, Senior Global Macro Economist en BNY Mellon, Bank New York Mellon. Bueno, tenemos con nosotros, como digo, a Sebastian. Sebastian, thank you so much for being in Negocios Televisión. Good afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Today, Sebastian, the ECB, the European Central Bank, raised rates in 25 basis points. What is your opinion on the decision of the ECB and Lagarde's speech afterwards?
Yes, so the interest rate decision was widely expected, and the decision around the asset purchase program as well. I think what wasn't expected was the revision of the forecast, particularly the inflation forecast and the core inflation forecast, which has been revised quite a lot higher for this year and next year. So the big surprise, I think, in the market was the revision for next year that no one or very few had expected. Taking a step back, I think, this is quite in line with what we've seen elsewhere as well. Many central banks have been surprised by the stickiness of core inflation. They've been revising their core inflation projections higher. The latest has been the Fed. So the ECB kind of moves in those steps. But nonetheless, the market was a little bit surprised. I mean, I don't want to say too much about the surprise, but it has been surprised by the forecasts.
Sebastian, Federal Reserve said yesterday that they predict a soft landing and not a recession. Do you believe this can be the case?
Well, our view is that, yes, it can be the case, but it's probably quite unlikely. Our view is that there's only roughly a 20% probability that the US ends up with a soft landing. And the reason for it is that the level of rates, keeping rates elevated for a prolonged period of time, will ultimately lead very likely to a recession. There's also the credit crunch that it remains likely. We haven't seen a deterioration in the banking issues that started in March, but those really haven't gotten much better. And some of the survey measures still point to weakness to come towards the end of this year. So we're very much here to see whether that weakness comes through. We're a bit skeptical, really, that we should expect a soft landing. The labor market remains incredibly tight. Wage growth has come down, but core inflation remains very sticky. If that's the case, there's no way outside. There's no way out for the Fed in terms of not hiking more, and that's a risk. I mean, they've signaled yesterday that they think they will hike rates further. They've revised higher their core inflation forecasts. If that inflation forecast realizes, I do expect them to hike further, and let's see afterwards. I think it's going to be very hard for the Fed to cut rates fast when inflation is as high, and that is what is really required for a soft landing to happen.
Sebastian, the Fed surprised the market by saying the FOMC still believes there will be 2 more rate hikes. However, inflation is coming down. So why did Powell yesterday have that hawkish tone?
It's about the level of core inflation. It's inflation. It is coming down. And that's the reason why they're taking a more cautious approach. They've skipped hiking yesterday, despite the fact that some of the data was stronger than expected, and in fact they've revised their activity, their GDP forecast higher. They said they think the unemployment rate will remain lower. That bit of the forecast was stronger, but they decided to skip because they know that inflation has peaked, so they are acting more cautiously. On the other hand, the level at which core inflation has settled is certainly not satisfactory for them. They want to see inflation moving convincingly down towards 2%. Otherwise, they risk really that inflation gets stuck to high levels for a prolonged period of time. That's the reason why the dots, the FOMC projections included the 2 additional hikes this year.
Sebastian, do you think central banks have already won the battle against inflation?
Well, it's a tough one. I think their central banks clearly are indicating that they're not comfortable with the level at which core inflation has settled. They all know that headline inflation was going to come down quite sharply due to the decline in energy prices. Many of them have been surprised by the stickiness of core inflation. What they're telling us is that there's going to be a little bit more to do, and probably if activity holds up, interest rates will have to remain higher for longer. So much of it depends on how the lagged effects of monetary policy transmit to the rest of the economy. They need to see a deterioration in activity or a further slowdown in activity, and in particular in the labor market. I think the labor market remains very strong everywhere. If you look at the US, if you look at the Euro area, if you look at the UK, and that is really, really core for central banks to declare a kind of victory, if you will, on the inflation fight. They need to see more convincing signs of a loosening in the labor market.
Vismara, Senior Global Macroeconomist at BNY Mellon Investment Management, thank you so much for being in Negocios Televisión. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Y mientras